Good afternoon. President Pelton, members of the Board of Trustees, members of the distinguished faculty and staff, proud parents, partners, relatives, friends, and most of all, members of the class of 2016. What a pleasure, profound honor, and source of great anxiety it is to be asked to deliver a commencement address. What to say to you that you haven't already learned from your professors and your peers here. You, already innovators, pundits, and openers of paths, informers and influencers, you keen antennae, that's the Latin plural for antenna, creators and reflectors, having previously graduated from college and today receiving your master's degrees. And what appropriate admonitions and reassurances for this, your important rite of passage, a day that is both an ending and a beginning. Moreover, how to assure your parents, relatives, loan officers, and benefactors of your arduous academic journey that you, newly or more brilliant, will not be returning home for too long, that their couches will be free of your form, and that you will be doing what you must relative to that unfortunate financial instrument called the student loan. I'll need your help in that department. So back to the question of good advice and an appropriate point of departure. Here, I borrow from the novelist J.K. Rowling. Some Harry Potter fans in the house. Who, addressing a graduating class several years ago, asked herself what she wished she had known at her own commencement, and what important lessons she learned in the time between that commencement day and the day on which she addressed the graduates more than 20 years later. Rowling discussed the benefits of failure. Having 7 years out of college failed on what she called an epic scale. A short-lived marriage had imploded. She was jobless, raising a child alone, and she says, as poor as is possible to be in modern Britain without being homeless. The fears that her parents had had for her and that she had had for herself had come to pass. And she says, I was the biggest failure I knew. This was a dark period of her life. That failure, however, meant a stripping away of all that was not essential. She said she stopped pretending to herself that she was anything other than what she was, a writer, and began to direct all her energy into finishing the only thing that mattered to her, a manuscript, her books, having lost all the other markers of success in the world. You know the rest of the story. Out of her great failure came her great success. The benefits of failure, however, are not what I am here to discuss, having never, ever, in my whole entire life, not once, failed. Standing here as a paragon of failure freedom, unblemished as I am before you, I can assure you that you will never, ever, in your whole entire lives, experience failure. Never. On a more serious note, This is what I wish I had known when I sat where you are seated many years ago and in the decade or so after. First, that only we can properly name ourselves. That only I can properly name myself. Once self-named, most of what I wanted came to me. Not without struggle, not without challenge, within the sphere that would become my world. I wish I had known that while schools provide us with essential, basic, and professional credentials and foundational experience, that they are a form of living, not merely practice for living, as educational philosopher John Dewey suggests. They nonetheless cannot name us. That task is up to us, especially those of us in artistic and creative fields, men and women, particularly women. An illustrative anecdote. I recall shortly after leaving college, working on and submitting pieces of my writing to journals and magazines, but not daring to call myself a writer. I was someone who wrote, but not a writer. I was someone who danced, but not a dancer. You see where this is going. I don't remember what shifted things for me exactly. Maybe it was a colleague whose work I thought was not as luminous and full of gravitas as mine was, being showered with fellowships and grants that made me realize my work was not so bad after all. Ultimately, the key was a posting I could not pass up for a scholarship for writers offering a residency in a very beautiful place. The application was not one for those who are uncomfortable calling themselves writers and say they write but are not writers. Despite having few writing role models at the time, despite the social messages that poems from someone like me would be less publishable than poems from someone who looked like the great and fabulously bearded American poet Walt Whitman, though I love Walt Whitman, despite my lack of accreditation from the great writers accrediting agency headquarters in who knows where, I submitted my application and was admitted to a residency of writers in which I communed with other writers and was considered and addressed as egads, a writer. Great writerly things began to happen when I assumed the moniker writer. The second thing I wish I had known as a young woman is that life happens as it is happening. Allow me to explain. Early on in life, I was waiting for my life to begin. First, life would begin after I'd completed my undergraduate degree. Then, as soon as I'd gotten my proverbial ish together, gotten a decent job, after which a graduate degree would be in order, allowing me precious time to write. Then life would start after I'd found the appropriately feminist man mate with whom to build a nest, etc., and so forth. I was the person waiting for life to begin after X, unaware that life with a capital L was indeed transpiring. I will share with you that I am an immigrant, and perhaps this had something to do with it all. My family was forced to repatriate from Haiti as a result of a homegrown dictatorship supported by powerful international interests. As a child, my parents believed that we would return to our home after the cycles of political violence and terror had run their course. This was not to be. Time passed, and the year the decades-long dictatorship fell was the year I graduated from Emerson College, I won't tell you when. Having spent most of my life here in the States. Now, many of you do not have the excuse of a dictatorship to keep you from fully inhabiting your lives. At least not yet, and I hope not ever. I would like to urge you to consider that your life takes place in real time if you don't already feel this, if you don't already know this, and I suspect some of you do know this, that there are no dress rehearsals for life. Thank goodness for Emerson's emphasis on experiential education, on learning by doing, in addition to learning in preparation for, which I benefited from. Take as important the quality of your daily interactions and revelations. The kindnesses and the attentions you pay are not as all part of your life. One makes the path by walking it, to paraphrase the poet Antonio Machado. You create your future by living it, daring to be in it, by engaging your existential and other questions and allowing them to lead you, even by failing and refining what you know with the knowledge you gain in your experiments, your trials, in your ateliers, in your studio or studios of life. Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, notes poet Rainer Maria Rilke, and try to solve the questions themselves. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. Crucial to all this is taking time to reflect on your life as you are living it. The third and final item under the "what I wish I had known when I graduated" portion of this address has to do with the understanding that the power of one's ideas can set one free. I wish I'd known that the power of my ideas could set me free way back then. I knew what I loved, the world of books, of ideas, of art, but did not know these interests would be enough for me, enough to sustain me, enough to make a career of. After grad school, I accepted several jobs because I thought I ought to, because the money was good and I was good at them, but which I found unbearable and which took me away from my real job of writing, engaging in art in some way. I wish I'd known earlier on that staying close to what I loved would make all the difference in my life, and it has made all the difference in my life. I encourage you to feed your deep pursuits, your passions, your art. Nourish the work that you find meaningful, and it will see you through. See your interests as the gifts they are, and allow them to unite the threads of your life. Imagine not having these interests. The poet Lorna Goodison tells us, if you have a gift, you must feed it. Otherwise, it will feel neglected and go away. Nurture your better gods, if I may use this poetic language, your talents, and recognize them as such. You know what happens in Greek and certain African mythologies when the gods get angry. I share part of my story here with you today because it might intersect with your own story as it relates to academic and career pursuits, that it might be in some way useful to you. I share my story as an immigrant as another possible point of connection. I may not sound like one or look like one, though what does an immigrant look like, right? But then, again, neither do many of you. Yes, you, immigrants, sons and daughters of transnationals. She's he's, and z's of immigrant grandparents, progeny of great-grandparent refugees, kidnappees, religious rebels, outlaws, indentured servants, and industrialists alike. We're not that dissimilar, all standing or seated here with First Nation people on Native American land. Here, in our great and fruitful diversity, multicultural, that thing that we have always been as a nation and which makes our nation great. Here, with our national and simultaneously global selves. How to put a wall around that? The history of American immigration, you already know. What I'm attempting to do, very subtly of course, is suggest a deeper link between us through the journeys of our families and their and our subsequent reconfigurations, to confound national boundaries and spheres of influence, and to call into question notions of our identities as fixed, to link my story to your story, because they are linked, I think, by history and culture and politics. If I tell you my story, I will be less of a stranger to you, and you'll be less of a stranger to me if I know and study yours. We will be able to convey to each other what we are and represent each other in ways that ideally reflect our common humanity. I'm less likely to demonize you if I know you suffer as I do. Take joy in what the world brings as I do. You are less likely to see me in limiting ways if you know I have pride as you do, have pity, concern, courage, and honor as you do. I tell you my story because you are creators, gatherers, shapers, and disseminators of information and stories. You facilitate pathways for those who cannot easily initially tell their own stories. You craft narratives that encourage us to consume useful and desired goods. You use stories to entertain, inform, persuade, and challenge us. Your engagement in stories will help create our culture and shape our aesthetic and practical realities. It already has in big and small ways. This is pretty serious work you are doing, accompanied by grave responsibility, especially for those of you who may have fewer cultural mirrors. You can use your considerable individual and collective power to reflect truth and truths and light, or to obfuscate it. A people are as healthy and confident as the stories they tell themselves, notes writer Ben Okri. Sick storytellers can make nations sick. In a fractured age, he adds, when cynicism is God, here is a possible heresy. We live by the stories. By stories, we also live in them. One way or another, we are living the stories planted in us early or along the way. Or we are also living the stories we planted, knowingly or unknowingly, in ourselves. We live the stories that either give our lives meaning or negate it with meaninglessness. If we change the stories we live by, quite possibly we change our lives. I close with the wish that the stories you write for yourselves, for us all, for our nation and our world, reflect the nuances and depth and beauty of the human experience. Stories that help build and sustain the kind of work, the kind of world you all and we so richly deserve. Congratulations, graduates. May you step into your glorious names.